everyone, and I would like to invite the chair of this session, Ms. Preeti Soodhan, who is the former Secretary, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. Preeti Soodhan retired as Union Health Secretary in July 2020 after nearly 37 fruitful years, especially the last 6 months during which she handled the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to this, she was Secretary, Department of Food and Public Distribution. She also served in Women and Child Development and Defense Ministries. In the state, she handled finance and planning, disaster management, tourism and agriculture. She is MPhil in Economics and MSc in Social Policy and Planning from London School of Economics. Amongst her notable contributions have been initiating 2 flagship programs in the country, that is Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao and Ayushman Bharat legislation on National Medical Commission, amendments to the MTP Act, Allied Health Professionals Commission and ban of e-cigarettes. Ms. Soodhan was also consulting with World Bank. She has served as chair of COP8 of Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, Vice Chair of Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, Chair of Global Digital Health Partnership, and member of WHO's Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. Thank you, ma'am, for participating and sharing this session. And I give the floor to you now.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everybody. I am accompanied by a very distinguished panel, Dr. Achal Bhagat, Dr. Nirmala Pandey, Dr. Anil Pranjape, and Ms. Nandita Bhatla. I will talk about them more when they speak. Since we are running a little short of time, I will be brief, but I would just like to set the stage for today's deliberations. And I would like to begin with some numbers. So in India, we have about 22% of the total population, which is adolescent, and this is census 2011, but 2011. And now recent studies say that every 5th person in India is between 10 to 19 years. So about 253 million adolescents. So this is the actually community that we are now addressing, whose issues we are discussing. The National Health Survey of 2015-16 tells us that overall prevalence of any mental morbidity between 13 to 17-year-olds was 7.3%, and urban metros had about 13.5%. And as per adolescent mental health report, 20% adolescents in any given year experience a mental health problem. So, and you know that because of COVID, we do have now issues of mental health, of mental illness, and I'd like to actually segregate them, are very, very real. And before I go further, I'd like to apologize and also introduce Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, former director of NIMHANS, and he's also with us. He has joined online. So welcome to you, Dr. And more about you when you speak. So I just wanted to say that, you know, mental health and wellness actually goes together. So when we talk about mental health, we have to think about wellness. And of course, there are mental illnesses that we have. I think our experts will tell us more about it and how the mental health or mental state also affects our mental illnesses. Gender remains a very critical determinant of mental health and mental illness and its outcome. The social consequences, the socio-economic consequences, say discrimination, abandonment, homelessness, vulnerability to sexual abuse, exposure of HIV, etc., are some of the factors. We just heard girls speak before our session when we were in the tea break. And if you heard them, they did elaborate on these issues and how, with COVID-induced isolation, lack of social interaction, not going to school has actually aggravated their anxiety, their depression, their workload. So it's those issues that we would like to discuss through these today's session. And I was thinking how to frame issues for today. Well, I would request the panelists to actually think about, say, how do you ensure a nurturing ecosystem in families, in communities? How do you identify signs of distress? How do you deal with stigma? It's a big stigma. We don't want to talk if we have any mental issue. How to help affected adolescents cope and bounce back? Why communication is important? Why are trained peers important? So there are government schemes also, which we can talk about later. But with this, I'd like to request our first speaker, Dr. Achal Bhagat, Senior Consultant Psychiatrist and Psychotherapist, Apollo Hospitals. He's also Chairperson Sarthak, Chairperson ADDI. How do you handle so many things, Dr. Where is the time that you have? So he's doing a lot of social work. He's working with the persons with disability. He's chairman of organizations working on issues of mental health in South Asia. He has been consultant to a lot of UN organizations like UNICEF, UNIFEM, and he's worked with JAPAL, etc. So over to you, Dr. And we are all ears. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Preeti. I must say one thing that I was drawn out of my home to see Shekhar here, and Shekhar's not here. Hi, Shekhar. Mental health in the times of COVID is an important and a difficult issue to talk about at the same time. But mental health should have we are having a Cinderella moment at this point of time. Suddenly, everybody is focusing on mental health, as if mental health prior to this the needs did not exist. Nalita reminded me during the coffee break that I talk about a mental health concentric to outline the needs of people and young people more so now. And young women more so now, young girls more so now. So we need to think of mental health needs as universal, because unless we think of mental health needs as universal, stigma will always remain. Then beyond that, there are people who are facing adversity and are likely to have a mental health impact. And there too, you need to put in place preventive mental health strategies. And then there are people who are already showing a mental health impact. And then there are people living with mental illnesses. And there are more than 200 kinds of mental illnesses. So the approaches have to be multiple and the strategies have to be diverse. No one single model can reach people. So the need is huge. The need is diverse. The ways of people fulfilling that, the ways of policy fulfilling those needs has to be multiple and diverse. The strategies have to be diverse. So what does one say in 5 minutes that makes sense? First, stigma comes from two basic assumptions in our society. One of incapacity and one of dangerousness that people have about people with mental health problems. The moment you have a mental health problem, there are still 200 laws in the country that equate it to being of unsound mind, and the assumption of incapacity is almost institutionalized, is almost based in our legal framework. Although it's been challenged in the new law, which Preeti ji had a great role in trying to bring forward in 2017. But the law will not, one law will not change an attitude of centuries. The second assumption is of dangerousness. If you have a mental health problem, then you are either considered likely to harm yourself or harm others. And if you focus on only dangerousness or incapacity as the two ways of looking at mental health, and then you have most policy framework, most human resource framework, most legal frameworks addressing this through things that are geared towards admitting people and treating them for mental health. Access to community mental health services to look after yourself in an everyday manner does not form a part of the policy framework. It becomes a tokenistic mention as a single line, but it does not form a significant part of the how-to. The how-to is focused on, the budgets are focused on institutionalized care. My next significant challenge that we face is that because of the centralization of how services should be delivered, there are oases of excellence, and the oasis of excellence. So the cities that have the most doctors in this country are Bangalore and Chandigarh, most psychiatrists. The cities that have most psychologists in this country are Bangalore and some other cities. You cannot have a barrier to entry on human resource and then hope that you will not have a treatment gap of 95%. If you say a BA psychology cannot help people, if you say MA psychology cannot help people, if you say a BA social work cannot help people, a MA social work cannot help people, if you say a nurse cannot help people, and if you keep on insisting that only MPhils will help people or only psychiatrists will help people, then I'm afraid you have the next 100 years to go to be able to address mental health issues. So what will happen then, that people will still continue to do the work. That work will not be standardized. There will be not much skill-based training during that time. There will not be a career path. And then we will say stigma is not changing. So the last challenge that is happening is what is happening now. What is happening now is because the need is huge, the need is being met through technology, through all kinds of resources, which are not governed, which are not even, they're not even standards of practice that have been set in place for apps, and there's a glamorization of seeking help for mental health. And we have a Western model of accessing mental health that is becoming more and more common in India. And I'm not a person who, having worked in the West and in India, and having used the principles that I learned in the West to be able to create services in India, I'm not a person who creates these dichotomies. But right now, what seems to be happening is that the one-on-one counseling, face-to-face counseling, seems to be becoming the preferred mode of seeking help. If we go that route where you have a 50-minute session and there's a one-on-one counseling, and then there's a supervision for that counselor, and you discover on the, dwell upon the why and how of how you've arrived at what you've arrived at, and then you have a aha phenomena. I'm sorry, again, we don't have the human resource or the financial resource for it. If you look at mental health as a public health issue, then what you need to invest in is one more ASHA worker who gets paid the basic minimum wage in whichever state that they are, and who does the work for mental health along with health. If you are going to look at early childhood and you're going to intervene there, you need to have multiply the Anganwadi worker, pay them better, train them better, and you need to have teacher counselors. You need to make portals of service delivery which are existing, make them better, and make them more accessible. As long as mental health is locked up in institutions, even smaller institutions like NGOs will always remain oases of care. The community will not have access. There are many models that have been put forward. There are many examples of services, but today is not the time to talk about them. One is just underlining, and the last thing, ma'am. You cannot have mental health for girls without working with men. So if you're going to address violence in this country, if you're going to address abuse in this country, we need to work with men. If we're going to address stigma in this country, we also need to work with men, not taking away the agency for women or their right to be accessing health in their own individual right. But again, as a public health policy intervention, when looking at increasing, creating an enabling environment for women, unless you change the way men are growing up in this country, the way what men are exposed to in this country, how men explore their masculinity, you're not going to be able to address the issues of violence and abuse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bhagat. Very rightly put. Actually, this is the issue, that mental health is to be viewed as a public health issue. Mental health has to be incorporated not only in institutional care, but also creating community frameworks where you see maybe peer educators can then counsel on day-to-day basis, or another ASHA, as you said, because ASHA model has worked very well. And yes, we need to work with men. Actually, I always felt that we have a women and child development ministry. Perhaps we need one for men also. And this work with men has to begin from homes itself, from our homes, from our communities, in our institutions. So thank you very much for those insights. We will come back to you for the recommendations, though many of the recommendations have actually already flown from what you have said. I now invite Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, psychiatrist and former senior professor, Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, former dean and former director in NIMHANS. He's available online with us. We are missing you offline here physically, Dr. Saab, but nevertheless, thanks for joining us. You have done a lot of work, and I know that you were part of national deliberations of POSCO Act. You have worked on the JJ Act with us, and you've always been championing the rights of the child, and you're still working with the National Commission for Protection of Rights of the Child. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Preeti ma'am. I'd just like to build a thesis in the time allotted to me based on something that my dear friend Achal has just said.
Dr. we can't hear you. You are muted, Dr.
I am enabled on my side.
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I'd like to build on what my dear friend Achal just mentioned. Please mark the 4 major issues that he's tabled: concentrics, diversity, models of public health, and in our instance, public mental health and public child mental health. And the 4th pillar, which is innovative extensions into systems. To begin with, when we speak of girls, particularly in the context of COVID, if you look at the whole invisibilization on the one hand and stigma on the other, one of the interesting questions to ask would be, which girl are we talking about? Needless to say, girls at large with gender dynamics and schisms in the experience of gender, particularly where articulation of aspirations are concerned, and the issue of well-being that Preeti ma'am referred to, of course, need attention. But if you really look at it from the perspective or the lens of minorities or even meta-minorities, and when you look at the pandemic itself, and the whole Childline data on child abuse at homes and the violence that Achal referred to, or if you look at again on the Childline data on child marriage and on trafficking, all of which have serious well-being and mental health implications. Or if you look again at a pecking order and hierarchy of the girl child with disability and attendant and developmental well-being issues, or if you look at the status of the preschoolers and what has happened in the pandemic, in fact, this is an opportunity for practitioners and researchers in developmental psychology on the evolutionary impact of the lockdown. You see, a 6-month-old child would in any case pre-COVID been at home. The 14, 15, 18-year-olds find their way of navigating the social mobility issue, through, sneaking out of the house with their mobile phones. What about the 4, 5, 6-year-olds? What's going to happen to their developmental trajectories and the kind of well-being and mental health impact that it has going forward? So, as you know, when Achal referred to Oasis of Excellence, this is something that he and I have discussed very often. For every child who manages to reach an Oasis of Excellence, a tertiary care center, there will be 99 others who will never manage to reach you. And what infrastructure do we really create for these kids, for their mental health issues to be addressed? And if you put these things together and look at a common psychological factor that seems to form the framework of what has happened in COVID, which is intolerance of intolerance of uncertainty, whether it is anxiety, whether it is trauma-related issues, the whole intolerance of uncertainty. And how do we create a system of conversations in a culture where parents' relationship with children, teachers' relationship with children is based on the culture of instruction, expectation, and obedience, and not on a culture of conversations. And this is where the whole point of looking at duty holders who go beyond the MPhils that Achal referred to and form a larger army of service providers with the kind of simple training which is required at this point of time. We are not talking about the more serious mental illness. But, as Preeti ji yourself, you pointed out, how do you recognize at the point of contact certain red flags and what can be first level responses that a service provider of different cadre provides, and how do you recognize more severe serious manifestations and refer them? And where I'm sitting today, in the city of Bangalore that Achal referred to as being, the nucleus of mental health professionals, unfortunately conglomerated here, and working in Samvad under the board of which I'm sitting. And I'll speak about this a little more as we go ahead in this program as to how the point that Achal made is something that we have executed in the last 15 months with the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India. And we are right now working in 29 states and 2 union territories in 4 verticals in mental health, in child protection, in education, and in policy and law. It's the first time in the history of this institute and this country that a project looking at child protection and mental health and psychosocial care actually has a vertical on policy and law to really look at what are called transdisciplinary approach. How do you take mental health to the policy, law, judicial systems? How do mental health professionals recognize that it's not just enough to treat PTSD? If a child has to go to court and a POCSO trial has to take place, whether online or in person, there are mental health issues that play out there as well. So this is a framework that we have, and I would be happy to share towards the end of this session some of the material that we have put out, which is some of the collective journeys that people like Achal and I have shared over many years of deliberations and deep concern about child mental health, about gender, about masculinities, and about sexualities, and all these frameworks that really constitute the mental health context of girl children and how they play out. Over to you, Preeti ji.
Thank you very much. And with your vast experience, I think what you have said about transdisciplinary approach, that's the framework we need. And we look forward to your concrete recommendations before the session ends, Dr. And now I request Ms. Nirmala Pandey She is the child protection specialist of UNICEF, and she has worked extensively to address issues of violence against children, mental health, psychological support, and prevention of child labor, trafficking. She has more than 15 years of experience working on child rights. Over to you, Nirmala.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me start by saying that before me, the two esteemed speakers, Dr. Bhagat and Dr. Seshadri, had really laid down the picture for us. At UNICEF, we have now learned that mental health well-being to the mental health condition is really a continuum. This time, the State of the World Children Report was actually globally dedicated to the mental health well-being, measuring the mental health well-being and the condition of the children, and how globally the pandemic has actually affected the whole young cohort. And it has also brought to us some of the systemic problems which have always been there, but which we have not actually been very much aware of. First of all, as Dr. Bhagat was saying, if we try to look at psychiatrists and therapists for every child, there is something which is never going to happen. I mean, it's never going to happen in India, but it's never going to happen in any country in the world. And that is why the approach which has worked for us is to look at the whole social ecological model, as Dr. Seshadri was also pointing, and Dr. Bhagat has laid down for us, to look at the whole continuum of care for the children and across the life stages. How can we support a child to grow up with the kind of mental resilience which is to be built up within their whole growth continuum? How do we have a multi-sectoral approach to mental health well-being, not to look at mental health conditions alone? How do we have an education system where, apart from learning other life skills, we also prioritize the social emotional learning component? How do we make the primary healthcare system more responsive towards mental health care? How do we integrate the very basic skills of mental health care and recognizing mental health needs of women and children? And also to look at the community, the larger, what we call it, the enabling environment, the policy framework, which actually supports the kind of programs and policies and promotes the kind of behaviors which promote mental health well-being, prioritize it, and recognize it as one of the key health issues. That is where in UNICEF, we have also changed our own framework of thinking. Earlier, when we started working, the mental health was only for children in childcare institution. We were only looking at some of the services which could be given for healing and recovery. And those were, of course, specialized services. But then we learned that that is not enough. What are actually the drivers of mental health? And we started working on violence against children. Of course, there is very limited data in a country like India, but whatever studies are there, they're telling us that violence starts at a very early stage, at very early ages. A formative study conducted by UNICEF in 2019, it found at least 26 types of violent behaviors by parents for disciplining children in the age cohort of 0 to 6 years. And the percentage of parents who thought it is okay to punish children in that way or to have, or who thought that children have the resilience to go through violent exposures and don't have any kind of mental health or any other developmental issues. It was more than 89%, approximately 90%. And it was across different education cohorts. It was across different economic levels. So that is the kind of environment in which children grow up in, which we have to take recognition of. Coming to schools, when we come to schools, corporal punishment, bullying are a very, very common forms of violence and abuse. To that, now we can add bullying online, harassments which are happening online, because children are so much on the digital platforms. It's also a necessity now at the time of the COVID, because most of the children have to take their classes online. But how is it impacting their mental health? Currently, at UNICEF, we are actually taking up a study to assess what has been the impact of online exposure and different kind of online violence on the mental health of children during the period of COVID. And the first round of assessments which has come show us that more than 60% of the young cohort, and we have looked actually till the age of 24, they have undergone one or other form of harassment online, sometimes or the other. Many had to seek help, but most of them thought that it's not very savvy to seek help. That is also a fact. The recent report, which was released globally, it says 1 out of 7 children and adolescents have some one or other form of mental health conditions. But in India, the Gallup survey, which was conducted, it shows that only 40% of the adolescent and young people even think of seeking any sort of help. So there is, as Dr. was saying, there is a stigma, but there is also a fear that there are not enough services. But the paradigm shift which we need to have is that, do we always need a mental health service, or what do we mean by mental health service per se? Are we looking at prevention and promotion as also one kind of mental health service, which could be given at the community level? Are we trying to look at the behavioral issues, the cultural norms which promote mental health? Are we looking at the gender issues which are so very ingrained? Are we looking at violence as well, which is very much pervasive? And during the pandemic, we know that both gender-based violence and violence against children, although we don't have very concrete data, both have gone up. A U-Report study which we did with young people showed that more girls and more younger women have gone through mental health issues, surely because because of the pandemic, whatever other spaces they had to let out of their feelings, the access outside their homes, that was denied to them. Many of them also said that when they are inside homes, the exposure to violence has increased for them. So there was no chance that they were also getting any sort of help. We know that social service workforce, the police helplines were all busy during COVID, doing other kind of job. So the issue of violence always got, a very secondary kind of response, even through the system. So whenever there is, and this is not something new which has happened during this pandemic, we have the experience from other disasters and natural disasters and also some experiences from global perspective when we saw Zika and all, that whenever any kind of disaster happens, the first and foremost brunt is always on women and children. Domestic violence and other abuses go up, and they have huge mental health impacts on the population. However, it goes unrecognized. This is where we have worked during this pandemic to look at what could be the alternative model, what could actually work. Can we think of our primary healthcare workers as one of the key components who also cater to mental health needs? Currently, we are working in a program which is called Tele Iswabhiman. We are reaching through self-help groups, Ashas and Anganwadis to pregnant women and new mothers. Also to looking at their mental health needs. How does their needs get addressed in the whole RCH component? Do we ever think of that? So these are the areas, these are the components on which I think now we have got more insight, and these are the areas where we need to think more critically as well, ask ourselves more questions. And most importantly, I think it's also time for us to invest more on generating more evidence, more data, look at kind of a research which informs. When we talk about mental health research, it is not only at a very highest level where you look at, the bigger psychiatric journals or Lancet, but you also look at community mental health. How is prevention strategies working? Are we able to promote mental health well-being and prevent violence? And what are the connections? How does the intersectionality play its role? Is it the same for a child coming from Jharkhand's tribal area who migrates out with parents versus a child in urban areas? Do we need to customize our interventions, our way of talking, our tools to reach out to them? These are various questions which are still unanswered, and I think we have to learn by doing. And that's something which we are also trying at UNICEF. And we work very closely with experts, of course. I am not a mental health expert, I'm a program manager, but from the policy point of view, I think that these are some of the questions which we need to take at a higher level. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirmala. Very well said. We do need to look at the socio-economic model across life cycle. We need to work on a growth continuum. We need multi-sectoral action, and emotional learning in education curriculum is very important. You've highlighted some very important points, and thanks for sharing the UNICEF survey on online bullying and harassment. And with COVID-induced stay-home studies, I think it's a real problem. Yes, we need to generate data and evidence at the local level. So we look forward to your specific recommendations also. Thank you. I now invite Dr. Anil Pranjape, the Executive Director, Community Aid and Sponsorship Program. He's also been an Army man. He carries an Army rank, and he's a visiting faculty at the Symbiosis Institute of Pune. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Preeti ji. I work at the grassroots level, and that is my forte. So when I speak about the mental health of girls over here today, I'm going to be sharing experiences and also sharing some of the solutions that we found along the way. My work is primarily in the urban poor communities of Mumbai and Pune, and I will be describing the various stressors that girls have been sharing with us over the last year plus. After the initial panic of April last year, sometime in early May, we started moving out of our houses and started interacting with our community workers and our coordinators in the communities. Among the most common wish that was expressed by the girls was, I wish I could meet my friends. This is probably because adolescence is a time when you are self-actualizing, you want to develop a sense of identity, independence, and you really interact a lot with your friends to share. But girls, as it is, as you all know, have very limited mobility. Thanks to the epidemic, the pandemic, they were even more confined into their houses and they couldn't move out. The solution that we found was by getting in touch with them on their mother's or somebody other family members' mobile, speaking to them over there, organizing group calls with them, not necessarily video calls, just normal audio calls, which are in groups, where girls were able to interact with each other, share what they were feeling. Over a period of time, as the lockdown eased, we again started bringing them together into community spaces where they could meet up regularly, interact, share. The second issue that really came forward from the girls was that I wish I could study like my brother does. The most common problem being that there just aren't enough devices in the house for online studies. If there is only one, then that is going to go to the brother. Trying to persuade the family to buy another was also a problem that we faced because the fathers preferred to keep the device to themselves. But we found that counseling the father over a period of time worked actually. And the father was willing to leave the device at home when he went to work, carry a feature phone. In the cases of fathers who insisted that they had to carry their device with them, we worked with school teachers to record their sessions and share these with the parents on WhatsApp so that the girls could access them later in the evening when the father came home and handed over the device to them. The third major stress was the possibility of marriage, which was a very real possibility that we found initially in the pandemic, when parents admitted to the fact that they had married their daughters off primarily because there was a fear of their own lives. अगर हम ही नहीं जिएंगे तो हमारे बच्चे को कौन संभालेगा? इससे बेहतर उसकी शादी कर लो. Subsequently also, we see large numbers of girls missing from the urban communities where we work. We are told by the parents that we have sent them to the village for safekeeping, but there is this underlying suspicion constantly nagging us that they've actually been married off over there. This is another point where we found we had two solutions to the problem. The first was, of course, counseling the parents through our community workers. But the second line of attack that we found actually working on its own was we also work with young boys. And we have been working with them, speaking about the perils of early marriage for girls, both for the girls' health as also the next generation. So a lot of boys who had been participating in our programs started speaking to their parents about how they should not marry off their sisters. And this really brought through to us that among the most important groups that we can work with are boys, young men in the community who can work for the mental health of girls also. A fourth area that keeps coming from the girls is, I wish I could understand my feelings. We all speak to them about the menstrual cycle. Unfortunately, we very rarely speak to them about the cycling of hormones that takes place every month. We found that once we explained the cycling of hormones to the girls, they were better able to understand why they were feeling certain things at certain times and able to manage those feelings also. So wherever we have life skills education programs, I strongly suggest that we also include a session on how the hormones cycle during this period and the impact of the hormones on your emotions over there. Conflicts in the household definitely increased during the pandemic, particularly during the lockdown period. And this was even worse in cases of fathers who drank. I'm certain all of you remember the day when they opened up the alcohol shops last year in May, and the crowds that was hanging around over there. And what really broke my heart that day was, after about a month, we again started seeing women and children standing outside grocery shops requesting for food support over there. The fathers had probably taken all the cash from the house and gone to buy liquor for himself that day. So trying to address these conflicts, speaking to community elders, convincing them to intervene in what are presumed to be household issues is something that we found very useful. And this is where the importance of community leaders really comes in over here. And the final area of stress for girls that we experienced was managing their menstrual hygiene. Very unfortunate, but people addressed the issue of food support immediately without thinking about it. But when it came to supplying menstrual hygiene products, a lot of people shied away from it. They had to be explained that this is a requirement, this should be done. It is the same as providing ration kits for the girls and their mothers. And it took a lot of persuasion. It took us almost 6 months to 1 year. But going forward, this is something that I feel should be given more publicity, more knowledge. And therefore, the next time we have a situation like this, the menstrual hygiene products will be provided as easily as we provide food support. To wind up, my recommendations to organizations like Plan India would be, first and foremost, provide safe spaces for girls to speak. This is very important, where they feel that they can express their feelings, where they know that they will be listened to without being judged and with respect over there. And the second is try and find simpler solutions within the community itself. We find that a lot of things, if tackled at the right time, early on enough, can be handled by people in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. I think it was a very insightful, very insightful address that you have made. We all knew, but maybe we didn't know how to point it out, because only experience can actually lead to the kind of articulation that you made. Yes, it's very heartening when you said that counseling worked. And working with boys made a difference. If boys speak up for their sisters, speak up for their wives later on, and speak up for the communities that they may be leading as a sarpanch or whatever, I think that makes a lot of difference. And that's what I think later we need to ensure that the policy nuances are also directed towards this kind of a participation. And yes, we need to provide safe spaces for the girls to speak. Communication is the key. Thank you for that. Now I request Ms. Nandita Bhatia, Director Programs Corestone, who has been working extensively as Senior Technical Specialist earlier on gender violence and rights portfolio at the Asia Regional Office of ICRW also. So over to you, and you have worked in Uttar Pradesh also extensively. So we are keenly waiting to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. So yeah, I just want to say that, when one is the last speaker on the panel, I guess there's an advantage that you have, that a lot of the, larger scenario, a lot of the impacts that girls have faced and, young people have faced, not to mention all of us out of the pandemic, have already been, highlighted, and we kind of know what the problem is before us. So what I'm going to do is maybe jump straight into some of the how-tos. And I'm going to use two of the pegs, I think, that our panel has, put forth on how to deal with the situation on mental health, I think, going forward. So one is like Dr. Bhagat said, I had told him that, his framing of the concentric circles, I think, is very, very important, which basically says that, all groups cannot be clubbed under the same broad brush, that they all need the same kind of mental health services. And, that I think is very, very important. The second peg that I want to take is about, services, and the fact that, yes, there is a gap in services. There's also a lot of focus post the pandemic on talking about, where can services reach? Do we have enough people? And that necessitates a focus on looking at the promotive and the preventive mental health, approaches. And at Cornerstone, I guess what I want to just talk a little bit about and, offer for everyone to think about is a promotive mental health approach that we've been working on globally, yes, but specifically in India, since about 2013-14. And it's a resilience building approach. And I know that the word resilience now is used in a variety of, contexts, but I want to do a little bit of deep dive to explain, how is it that the approach to promotive mental health, which is resilience building, what are kind of some of the things that, go into it. And I think at the core of building resilience is the recognition of emotions. And a lot of the programming that we have developed actually lays its core on emotional awareness, to, understanding what is it that you are feeling, and the fact that there is something you can do to manage or cope with it. And I think as we've spoken about the impacts of COVID, it's been this, magnitude of emotions that everyone has been feeling, and kind of this feeling of being overwhelmed. And, the resilience approach is the framing of resilience, in fact, is very interesting. And I was thinking and congratulating Plan for calling it what's it? Back better. And, resilience, the way we define it is to bounce back and thrive from adversity. And, one of the core, I think there are two core issues that I want to talk about the approach, because I think that's very important to understand. One is that, it's an approach that talks about going from the inside out. And the inside out means that you actually start with looking at what is inside. I think the recognition that you have the assets and the strengths within you. Many of these concepts draw from positive psychology, which is the spin which says that you don't only have to worry or set right what is wrong, but you also have to build and enhance what is inherently strong within you. And a lot of the, a lot of the assets, like, whether it's character strengths, whether it's your ability to manage, they actually exist within you, and you recognize and build that up. So that is really one fundamental driver of the way that the curriculum has been developed. And I think the second part of the inside out is that once you have that belief that, yes, I can do what it takes to overcome this challenge, the rest of the application is built around adversity. So actually, challenges are inherent to the way you start applying those skills. And whether it is, challenges like we have this whole 3-tier approach about, first the assets, then the relationships, and then really the societal, issues or challenges that girls and boys face, adolescent girls and boys face on a daily basis, whether it's around gender, whether it's around violence, whether it's around advocating for your rights. So in that sense, it's it's a continuing which builds the resilience and teaches young people how to apply it as they learn and thrive from challenges which are daily. I think the second part of it, which a lot of us have talked about, is not everyone can reach a service, and not everyone, no matter how much we drum up the services along the continuum, which I think Nirmala ji mentioned. Extreme distress, mental illness is at one end of the curriculum, which needs very, very, very specific, interventions. You need, trained professionals to do that. But a large part of the continuum, which is around the, which has well-being on one side, and then, before you reach distress, that's where the whole promotive and the preventing aspect actually comes in. And that part of we believe that the promotive mental health is something that can be very easily embedded within institutions. And I always want to come back to institutions because I guess we talk about the individual, but the way we've tried it is, whether it's been in school with teachers, whether it's been parents, whether it's been, done with SHE groups. These are the 3 or 4 settings where we've tried resilience building approaches and tried to build evidence, along the way that it does 2 kind of things. So one is it definitely, enhances well-being, in the more traditional way about talking about mental health, but it also amplifies some of the other social outcomes that we want to see. So whether in schools, it's on education, whether with parents, it's like a better relationship with their child, whether on reproductive health, it is about gender attitudes, it's about, health awareness and knowledge. So it really becomes an amplifier because, like we all know, we've been talking about, I think the Delhi government especially has talked a lot about the happiness curriculum, which is SAL based, right? So some of these SAL, the socioeconomic learning approaches, I think what the resilience curriculum does, it takes those and it teaches you how to apply it, marginalized people, how to apply it really to some of the challenges that you have and you thrive from it. And the second part of it is that because it's a peer supported model, problem solving is something that inherently becomes, something that the child learns to do in their lives. And they also learn to bring them to the group so that you can do group problem solving. There are a lot of, like we know, daily anxieties, feelings of isolation, that one has been able to show that it actually moves because of this. So I'm not going to talk about the model and the resilience approach. I'm sure, that's something that we have a lot of papers and, we had an early on RCT, which actually showed how this evidence was important, because way back when we used to say, okay, let's do a program to enhance well-being, it was like, but that's not important. You need to focus on other things. So there's a lot of evidence building that we've done on the way on that. And I just want to end with saying one thing about the, the resilience approaches and where we feel that mental health is now, is that, I want to bring back the point of the institutions, because I feel a lot of what we've talked about and, we've all spoken about the different kind of challenges. We can't program for every challenge along the way. But if some of this institutionalization happens with the key adults who are there in the environment of the child, and of course, teachers are very, very important in that. And I think resilience in itself, or, mental health, mental health and well-being to be enhanced for some of these care providers, whether it's the ashas, whether it's the teachers, whether it's the parents, in themselves will go a long way in actually giving them that atmosphere that kids or, children need to enhance some of their mental well-being along the way. So I'm going to, just stop here with talking about what we've been doing and look forward to the next part of when I can speak about recommendations.
Thank you, Mrs. Nandita Bhatia. And you have spoken about positive psychology, strengthening the positive and tackling the challenges. And I am sure that if we strengthen the positive, that helps to actually tackle the challenges. And need for a peer support group, sensitizing caregivers. So thank you very much. We look forward to your recommendations in the next round. So now we have listened to our esteemed experts here. And I am supposed to ask a question to each one of you and then request you for recommendations. I clubbed these 2 parts to save time. And I request that each one of you can respond to the question and then we'll go ahead with the recommendations also. I have tried to frame the questions taking cue from the theme that you were emphasizing on. So I would request Dr. Achal Bhagat, our first panelist, But how you spoke about the need to incorporate mental health in primary care. And it's a very important point. How do we do it? Now, you may be aware that under the Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Centers, we have 12 packages now. Actually, we had most of the primary health institutions doing maternal and child care services, plus the preventive immunization, as you know. But now we've listed out 12 more packages, including geriatric care, palliative care, and mental health care also. However, these are the list of desirable, though we have, I have been emphasizing when we actually use this approach that these should be actually non-negotiable, but the states are taking time. And Karnataka is one example who has done a lot of good work in mental health in primary healthcare paradigm. So I'd like to sort of request you to guide us as to how we can strengthen that and give your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Ki bhabe korbe, how do we do it? That's the more difficult one. I don't think you can restrict it to the portals of healthcare to deliver mental health. That's the first principle. Healthcare has to be delivered, mental health care has to be delivered from multiple portals. Health portals being a significant part of that. But because service providers deliver service, we've been negotiating with social welfare and women and child for mental health interface for years, but such interfaces are difficult to create. So to create them at every district, every village level is going to be difficult. But so I think that we need to go into a mission mode for mental health. We need to do two things. One, assign a significant budget as in a mission, because 20,000 crores is a popular number. I would just go for that 20,000 crore number as a mission mode for the next 3 years or 5 years to be able to sustain cross 20,000 crores. I mean, just because everything is 20,000 crores nowadays, and be aspirational. Yeah. No, so this is for next 3 years, and you supplement it after that. And this is beyond the existing budgets and whatever increments that needs to. So you put aside finances, create a championing of mental health at the village level. The championing then ensures that all the programs that need to happen from school, all the and that championing is owned by the community. Championing process is owned by the community, by self-help groups, for example, by local governance groups, for example, and you integrate that into education and health to begin with, and social welfare, because disabled will get excluded if we only look at education and health. So disability, social welfare, and you integrate it into, like Samvad is doing, into all aspects of it. Child care and protection, violence against women, all statutory services that require a counselor to be there, have a counselor there with a preventive, promotive, and a therapeutic role, with a referral network at a district level. Because if you do not have a referral network, then the 20% who come up from these preventive and promotive programs, where do they go? And if they don't get help, then you don't challenge the stigma. So put the money in place, put a structure in place, which at the moment is a vertical, but its job is to integrate. A vertical that does not deliver through itself, but is the source of money. Because the moment there is a conduit of money and there is a standardization of processes, and you don't need to reinvent processes. Let's say NIMHANS has already got, or Samvad has already got the processes, fine tune some of those processes, put in place. And two more suggestions. One, double the number of ASHA workers in the country. That will help all healthcare, including mental health care, include mental health care as a responsibility, and include mental health care as one of the NREGA activities. 100 days for mental health is how you put in place the community championing for mental health. If you have that as a tier 2 NREGA activity, rather than building roads or making ponds, you also have service delivery for mental health as a mental health activity and training around that. Thank you.
Very much, very interesting recommendations. And if we can make it as a MNREGA activity, learn to also, I would say, monetize it, then nothing like it. But I think it's something that we need to work on. Thank you very much. And I would now request Dr. Seshadri, who joined us online. He spoke about the importance of transdisciplinary approach. How do we incorporate this with stakeholders? You have spoken about Samvad. We are very keen to learn what are the specific recommendations of those learnings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Preeti ji. I will respond to this, beading in some of the thoughts that have been expressed.
I can't hear you. You are mute. You are mute, please. Let's have mute. Yes,
am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much, Preeti ji. I'll just try to bead in the recommendations based on some of the thoughts that have already been expressed and the Samvad initiative. I want to go back to the point that Dr. Paranjpe made about this business of some of the experiences of girls and women, particularly around marginalization and violence being relegated to household issues, to make the point that domestic violence is not a personal issue. कि उनके घर का मामला है, किसी के घर के मामला है. It is a public health problem. And also to beat in the point that Ms. Batla made about resilience in relation to emotional experience, to what Dr. Paranjpe said, as safe spaces for girls to articulate their lived experience, and therefore to get out of the whole notion that knowledge necessarily comes out of research, which is kind of poverty of epistemology, to really look at the lived experiences of people as Dr. Paranjpe described. So what really happened, because of a firm belief in public child mental health, is that for the last 6 or 7 years, we'd been implementing a community child and adolescent mental health service project. It started as a Bangalore initiative, then it spread to Karnataka and then to Chhattisgarh and then to Gujarat and then to Nepal and Afghanistan and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. At which point of time the government of India heard of this initiative, because by that time we already had a repository of these activities across multiple service providers, non-professional service providers of the nature that both Achal and Nirmala have referred to, in order to meet the need. And in 2019, we submitted a proposal to the Ministry of Women and Child Development, and we had a meeting just before the pandemic had kind of really set in, and the first lockdown was yet to be announced. And this project was sanctioned, which is now known as Samvad. Now, Samvad is a national initiative and an integrated resource for child protection, mental health, and psychosocial care, located in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Now, in child protection, we are working with childcare institutions and their staff, with child welfare committees, with juvenile justice boards, the child protection scheme, and the child protection societies across the country. In education, we work with education boards, with teachers, state boards, the central boards, in doing direct program with these teachers to really look at the emotional lives and the lived experience, which form the nucleus of the mental health. In policy and law, we are working with the judiciary and national at the national and state levels and with legal services authorities. And in mental health, we are working with the district mental health programs. Recently, we've completed a major national consultation to really table the issue of providing centers of referral for those who have severe forms of distress or severe mental health illness. And all this is being institutionalized as a very robust scaffolding for this program to actually be rolled out in the. What we are also doing starting in Jan, and again, this is a point that both Nirmala and Achal made, is that we are taking mental health into the panchayat system, and our panchayat rollout is going to start both with the elected representatives. And how we table mental health is we speak about child development. We speak about gender and power, not necessarily in the context of violence or in the context of gender-based violence or in the context of men, but it is our starting point, and we call this as a windowed approach, where all duty holders and service providers then have the necessary material with them to actually introduce them, whether if it's the village child protection committee or whether it is the CDPO, and how do we then equip them to take this idea of children's lived experience, their development as a starting point, and then build into it. And all this material is available now in an upgraded or a updated website of Samvad, which is nimhanschildprotect.in. So some of the recommendations we have are present in this website, both in terms of the preventive, promotive, and the curative therapeutic materials that are available. And in Samvad, we do not believe in copyright. We believe in copyleft, which is to use this material, adapt it, and disseminate it across the country, as well as to our other materials which are present as Samvad Nimhans, over about 120, 150 programs that have been done for all these service providers, which are available for people to view and adapt across the kind of sectors in which we want mental health to become really an agenda, which is a national agenda, as Achal pointed out before me, that just as water and roads are, that it becomes that kind of an agenda. So this is what Samvad, which is an acronym for support, advocacy, and mental health interventions for children in vulnerable circumstances and distress, is attempting to do. In principle, we will be operative for the next 3.5 years. We are just operative for 15 months, but we are already working in 29 states and 2 union territories in a very active way with all these service providers. And it will be our honor and privilege for Nandita ji, for Dr. Paranjpe, Achal and I have worked shoulder to shoulder in this journey for many years, and for the kind of systems that Nirmala seeks to assist, that it will be our honor and privilege. And we are in touch with many of them. We are in touch with Nirmala, and recently we've actually completed the first Panchayati Raj rollout in the state of Assam with the collaboration with UNICEF as part of this Panchayati Raj rollout for mental health and child protection. So this is what finally, Preeti ji, we mean by transdisciplinary, that a judge in the POCSO code needs to know what mental health dimensions, and how do you take history from a 3-year-old? How do you take information? Similarly, a mental health professional needs to know that it's not merely a question of treating PTSD, because there are mental health issues that play out in the POCSO code. How do you look at pathways of vulnerability for children who unfortunately come into conflict with the law? To really look at the point that Ms. Bartla and Dr. Paranjpe made, the emotional lives and the lived experience of people, and a space for those to be articulated, but also for a space for people who are trained to not just listen, but also provide a first level response. And what this first level response should be is also something as part of the resilience model. But also if someone says कि मुझे घबराहट है, या what should you say that animates or energizes particularly a girl child in a manner that contributes not just to the alleviation of that anxiety, but also to the growth of an affirmative identity, and how we build in boys' response and men's responses to create a truly egalitarian way of thinking and an egalitarian way of being. Over to you, Preeti ji.
Thank you very much. I just want to share with you that your work with panchayats is priceless. It's going to be priceless, I'm sure, because my experience of Beti Bachao Beti Padhao showed that when we conducted Gram Sabhas on the theme, that is when the program caught the imagination of people. And when we were asked, actually, a sort of pressure to have a celebrity as a champion, but no. We said every village will have a Beti Bachao Beti Padhao champion. And today when you see those trucks and autos having that slogan, it's that groundwork, it's the local work that actually has prompted it. So I think that's what we need to learn, and I'm so glad that you're doing such substantial work.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I just have a constraint. I have to leave by 6:10. So if this doesn't finish, I have already requested Dr. Achal to please sum it up, but I think we should be able to close it by then. So my next question to you, Nirmala, and is about, you spoke about having mental health in school education curriculum. So just to tell you that under the Ayushman Bharat, we have a scheme of health and wellness ambassadors in schools. You're aware of that, I'm sure. The curriculum was made by great, deliberations with civil society, with NCERT, and everybody's together. Mental health component was also very important to ensure that we promote healthy behavior, we prevent unhealthy and unsafe behavior. We also create lines for communication and health, not just in terms of physical health, but wellness that I spoke in the beginning is also important. So how do you think that, what ideas do you have on that, and how UNICEF could support that program? Thank you. And your recommendations.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, let me start by saying that we were, as UNICEF, we were very much part of the processes of, when the whole school health and wellness program was being developed. Even now, we support in the whole capacity building and rolling out of the program. I'm actually as a part of the master trainers in the pool, and it's really having a very good impact. One of the things which was integrated into the curriculum was the personal safety component. Partnership we also had with an organization called Urban, who have actually have evidence-based modules on that, and we are really glad that it has been incorporated into the whole school health and wellness program. Ma'am, another platform which has now also come up that the ministry has proposed, the Mano Darpan, the school mental health approach, where they are not talking about individual teachers having the responsibility, but every single teacher understanding that caring for mental health is an integral part of the whole quality education package which the ministry is proposing under the new national education policy. It is to say that the way we transact in the classroom, the way we interact with children, the way we let children interact with each other, and the space which is given to both girls and boys and of children of all the gender identities. And we have to now, start talking about all the gender identities, even within the school space. they have a space to speak, to discuss, to come up with their own ideas, even about how to run the school, how to run the classrooms. It is nothing new. We have been talking about the participation of younger people into the processes for a long time, but now is a time where the goals have shifted towards understanding how it impacts their mental health as well. And I would say that with a lot of bad things which has happened during COVID, it has also given this opportunity that mental health has become now an issue which is recognized across the sectors, particularly for the education sector. Now that the schools are reopening, one of the key things that UNICEF is supporting the state government is apart from having all the COVID appropriate behavior, making it safe and all, is also to look at the first 3 months of when children are coming back and how would we readjust their curriculum and activities so that they have very little stress. One of our studies shows that only 60% of the children have been able to access any kind of online learning. What about the other 40%? And the other 40%, let's not forget, is the number of 286 million. So that's the kind of numbers we have in India. And even among those 60% who were able to access a little bit of education online, most of them couldn't complete their curriculums properly, surely because the devices were not good enough, the internet connectivity was not there, or even after 1 hour maybe the mother or the father needed the phone. So as to say that we are also seeing a lot of children specifically who belong to the families where mothers or fathers migrate. That whole cohort, and that accounts for more than 40 million children in our country in the age group of 6 to 18. That 40 million children who have some association with migration, and when they have these kind of school blockages, the learning gaps due to digital device, they are more likely not to never get back to school. And imagine, and when they do get back, imagine the kind of mental trauma they are going through. So one of the key things, and this is also our recommendation to the state government, is to have a curriculum which is flexible in the schools, which will look at the differential learning needs of the children and have a differential approach to the learning with peer support, with voluntary support and extracurricular help for the children who have missed out. The second thing is not to look at mental health well-being of children solely as the responsibility of a single school counselors, which is also very rare given India's context. And even building their capacities is going to be a long way, even though we have started now. But to look at it as an integral part of the teaching curriculum, which is something that the NCERT is also considering, and UNICEF is working very closely with NCERT to develop that curriculum. Also online courses. In fact, in Madhya Pradesh, we have already developed an online curriculum. The teachers can access it through like 16 hours curriculum to understand how they can integrate mental health well-being. And this is the key word, to look at mental health well-being of the children as a part of the curriculum. The next thing for the schools, and this is what we are strongly advocating, is to have the component of the social emotional learning. We are also looking at smart solutions, AI assisted solutions, etc. But we very well know that those solutions would reach only to that many of children. So how do we have social emotional learning as a part of the curriculum and not as a separate activity? That is a question question which is for us. This is somewhere we are working very closely with some of the states who have volunteered, like in Maharashtra, we are working with the education department to have the curriculum across primary, primary and secondary levels, to work with teachers and build their capacities and design those curriculums, design those activities, and design those evaluation sheets for teachers to use in the classrooms. At a very granular level, how do we operationalize them? The main recommendation for from our point of view is Dr. Bhagat said that we need to have more investment for mental health. India spends 0.05% of the health budget on mental health. It is one of the countries who spends less than 1%. Even Brazil spends 1%, even Bhutan spends 1%, but we are even less than that. Looking at our need, we really need to advocate that we need this investment to be more. We can have preventive and promotive, but then we all know that we would need referrals. There would be cases, we have one-stop centers, we have district mental health programs, which are so poorly resourced that they are barely functioning. We need to put enough infrastructure in place for the referrals where people don't have to travel miles and miles. Then I think that we need to recognize that there are pockets and spaces where children have more trauma, where there is need of more investment. We have seen it in Kashmir. We work very closely over there with IMHANS, which is the state mental health institution and teaching college. We work very closely in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, and we know that the needs of the children are different over there. So even when we have a preventive and promotive approach over there, it needs to be tailor-made. The third recommendation from our side is to look at also a component which we have never looked at, but which always has a very high percentage of positive results for children, and that is parenting. In our country, this is one area which we have very—
1 minute more.
Yes, this is my last recommendation, is to look at the parenting programs at scale. How can we operationalize it? Whatever parenting work we have been doing so far has been in niches, has been as pilots. But if we have to have a parenting program specifically for the younger cohort, if we look at the 0 to 6 age group, I mean, as Dr. Bhagat said, that have one more Asha or one more Anganwadi worker, which will give us so many more benefits and so much more results for children. And that's something we have to look at very closely, because whether it's trafficking, whether it's child marriage, whether it's child labor, or any other forms of violence which leads to mental health condition, and also towards promoting good mental health. What kind of behaviors promotes good mental health, resilience, better developmental results for children and adolescents? What kind of things are those? And these are the only, we have got good models. We have piloted the parenting for lifelong health model of WHO in India. Actually, it has given us immensely good results. But again, that was a pilot. And how do we take that to scale? That would need investment. And as Dr. Bhagat was saying, we need to really have not only for the services at tertiary level, but also for prevention and promotion at the ground level, and build that workforce.
Thank you very much. I move to Dr. Anil Pranjapal, and very insightful remarks you had made and a lot of learning from what you said. Just want to request you if you have any ideas on how do we move from pilot to policy in counseling boys, apart from your other recommendations?
I would think that the policy changes that need to come in as far as boys is concerned is to have a policy for adolescent boys in the first place. We already have some kind of policies around the kind of education that is required for girls, the kind of healthcare that is required for girls. This could possibly come in under the adolescent reproductive and sexual health programs, where means of making boys understand what masculinities are is important. We usually begin by discussing with them what is the ideal man, and they begin with the physical attributes, then go on to the question of being a protector of the family, the provider, and they start examining their own thinking, their own role over there in greater detail. That would, I think, be the way forward.
Thank you very much. And now to Nandita ji, you spoke about peer group support, and just to relight some numbers, we have about 4 lakh peer educators under RKSK program, and they are aged between 15 to 20, both boys and girls, you may have heard of it. So that's one model, but how do we qualitatively improve that apart from your other recommendations?
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, I think, you mentioned the adolescent health program and the RKSK. So we have actually been in some of the working groups to, put, embed within that some of these concepts of resilience, of peer learning. But I think when we are talking about peer, peer supported models, it's very important that these peer support models actually have an ecosystem around them. And that's why I keep going back to the point of the adults or, the caregivers who are in the vicinity of the children, who can actually give that push and an environment for them to, really take the kind of actions or, do the kind of things that they start realizing. So I guess that would be one very immediate thing that I would want to put out. And linking with that, what I said earlier, that, often we see a lot of these, whether it's service delivery through Ashas, through Anganwadi workers, all our teachers, as people who would just take the content and, transact it with the children. But I think the strong advocacy that we really want to do is that, what about the wellness, the resilience, the strength and feeling good themselves, about all of these caregivers. So I really feel that as we plan for the promotive mental health programs for young people, we also plan for, institutionalizing some of these, resilience building models for all of these caregivers. And, we are very happy to either work with people or try these out, because these are the small pilots, during COVID that we have actually started doing, just because, when the Ashas frontline workers have been going out, they have been facing an onslaught, not just of what they experience themselves in their families and in their communities, and they've not been knowing how to deal with, so much of, like I've been saying, the plethora of emotions that they face. So yes, a real advocacy point for that. Why I also want to emphasize on that more than I think some of the points that Dr. Bhagat has already said about, the Mental Health Act, looking at how to operationalizing it, putting a budget behind it. I think maybe states who are interested may even want to have, panels of, organizations who work to put them on the ground. But if we invest in the institutions and the caregivers, what we have seen, at least in our experience, is that it really reduces the stigma as well, because the children would reach out and want to talk to either their peers or the caregivers. And if they give the kind of, response that really encourages them, it goes a long way in reaffirming what the child is feeling and, not being labeled as someone who's experiencing all kind of, very unfashionable words that, one knows kids use for each other. So I think I'm not going to repeat some of the recommendations along that. I think the only other thing I want to add is that, this what do you call it, psychosocial first aid, or the first line response that we've been talking about. I think that's a very critical skill that which we need to start building into different cadres, so that the rising up of really the distress cases is what the referrals can then look at, but there is really a response that is built in the intermediary. And sorry, one last point in terms of the themes, which is something which we ourselves realize is a gap in a lot of the mental health programming, that of course children are not often heard when they, especially during COVID, they're kind of put aside because the family is dealing with so much. And therefore parenting programs become very important. But the area which I think got missed out a lot was training on how to deal with grief and separation. That is an area which I think still remains in a lot of the mental health work that we've done as an area which probably needs more attention. And we know that children react very differently, they express it very differently, and often that need gets lost in some of the other programming. So I'm going to stop with that. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I think this was a panel of absolutely very, very committed panelists, and thank you for joining here. And I feel privileged. I've learned a lot from all of you. I think I was the only generalist here. And if I sum up the recommendations, I think as Dr. Achal Bhagat said, mission mode. We need a mission mode approach. We need an adequate budget. Of course, 20,000 is our wish list. We need to start somewhere, and it has to be a focused budget allocation. Create champions at the village level, education, health, social welfare, women and child ministry, and then some institution working with boys. We need to integrate all of them. So apart from having laws backing mental health, we need, as he said, a referral system which is clearly defined. And of course, I believe very much in the ASHA model, and I think it's a great recommendation that an ASHA for mental health in every village. I don't know whether government can afford that, but yes, there's no harm in advocating. Someday it will happen. Then, of course, include it as a MNREGA activity. So that's a very interesting recommendation. That's also, I think, to be noted by this panel. And as Dr. Shadri said, that tackling mental health at the panchayat level, a windowed approach. Speak it as a windowed approach. That's a very important recommendation again. And as Nirmala said, the new education policy does highlight mental health, gender sensitivity, recognizing dignity of all gender identities. A flexible curriculum, and learning needs, emotional learning to be incorporated in the curriculum, not as a separate module. I think that's very, very important. And it has to be contextual. That's also difficult areas like Jammu and Kashmir. She said there were separate different programs. So I think the context is also very, very important. And parenting programs. So and parenting programs are important now with these nuclear families. We don't have that family support of Nana, Dadi, and their learnings and their wisdom anymore. And as Nathaniel said, that policy for adolescent boys, the peer learning, peer supported model needs an ecosystem. I think that's a very, very important point. So sensitizing the caregivers, the frontline workers, and I think the medical fraternity at every level. And it's very important too. And then as Nanditaji said that while promoting mental health, we should institutionalize resilient and feel-good models for frontline workers and for the caregivers, because that's when their investment also becomes sustainable. And of course, psycho-social first aid is a great concept. And we do have again in the RKSK model, learning on mental health issues module for all generalists, all medical staff. But I think this first aid model is very good. We could recommend to the government. Dealing with grief and separation, especially during these times, is important. And I feel that the core issue is having self-esteem, having self-worth, and that we can begin from our homes, from our communities, from our institutions. So thank you so much. Bye.